Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming this afternoon. More still turning up. Good on you, Jeff. Just make way for Jeff, please, there. Take a seat. Thanks for coming. This afternoon, we're continuing on our lesson of Daniel chapter 5, the fall of Babylon. This is this little brochure here we're doing. So I think last week we didn't get too much done because we kind of went on a bit of a journey, didn't we? We looked at a whole bunch of things. We simply asked the question at the beginning of the lecture last week, why are we doing this? You know, why do we do these studies? Why do we study the Bible? Is it really relative? What's the reason for it? I mean, we're studying, Daniel is 2,600-year-old document. What's that got to do with us today? You know, why? And we asked that question. We went through a whole bunch of information on the screen. We looked at world events that are going on now. We showed a video of the situation in public schools now with children being not so much forced but coerced with their gender identity. We looked at what that means for kids, for parents. Teachers have now been told, and this is right here not here, this is in Queensland, of course, across the state, the country, as well as other countries, that teachers can no longer or are not allowed to inform the children's parents if they have a gender preference. So it's to be kept silent, secret, which is pretty crazy. So we looked at these things of what the world is doing and what the Bible teaches. Remember, our class is all about looking at global events, looking at life through the lens of the Bible. That's what we're doing here. So we're looking at comparison. There's the world's way, and God has a way here. And that's what we do these classes for. And we saw a lot of interesting stuff last week about that. If you want to catch up, go catch the video. It's on YouTube. And you can watch it. So we ended up with doing question 6. So perhaps, no, question 5. We've got 2. Question 6 is coming up now, I believe. Yes. Okay, so if we go to Daniel chapter 5 in your Bibles, Daniel chapter 5, and we're going to be doing verses 13 to 16. I'll just get to that on the screen for you. There's our video. Where do we get up to? We're going to... yes, we looked at all this stuff last week. Here we go here. So, okay, I'm on question 7. That's okay. Let's do question 6 anyhow, just to back us up. So Daniel chapter 5, verses 13 to 16. Let's just do that one to rehash from last week. Are you ready to read that, Tesma? Yeah, thank you. Righto, go ahead, son. No, not 13 to 16. Don't look at that. Look at your Bible. 13 to 16.
Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Are you that Daniel who is one of the captives from Judah? Father king brought from Judah. I've heard of you. The Spirit of God is in you. The life understanding is excellent wisdom, and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now, the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought before me. They should read these writings, make known to me its interpretation. But they cannot give interpretation of the thing. And I've heard of you that you can give interpretations explained in
That's a hard word.
Now, if you can read writing and make known to you its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have chain of gold around your neck, and you shall be a girdle in the
And 17. Yes, no, 16. 16, that was all. Thank you. So, what's going on here for those who weren't here before? yeah, it's hard to sort of pick up without being here last time. This writing is on the wall. This hand has come out and written this writing on the wall, and everyone's, including the king, is really, really scared. What's this writing mean? What's this all about? So he summoned together his astrologers and so on to come in and explain, to translate this writing on the wall to find out what's going on here. That's the scene. The question asks here, what position did Belshazzar offer to Daniel if he read and interpreted the writing? What position? Third. Yeah, you shall be third ruler in all the kingdom. So he's offering him all this stuff, and he's also offering him to be the third ruler if you can tell me what's going on here. All right, that's where we left off last week. So I'm just trying to get myself sorted here. And I'm not doing a good job of it right now. So, all right. Third ruler. Now, the reason we learnt last week he's a third ruler because Belshazzar, even though he was king at the time of Babylon, wasn't the actual king. He was sitting in place of his father. Remember that? We found that Nebuchadnezzar is actually king of Babylon, but he gave that role of kingship to his son Belshazzar, and Nebuchadnezzar went away to become a priest because he wanted to worship the gods of the Babylonians and become a priest in their temples. So he left his son in charge, and that's the scene we got here. That's why Belshazzar is saying, you'll be third ruler. Obviously, I mean, if he's going to give him a good position, he'll give him the second position, but he can't give him the second position because he has a second position. Nebuchadnezzar is the king. Belshazzar is his son who's sitting in his place as a co-regent, and that's why he's offering the kingdom as a third ruler. It says it there in the notes why he would do that. All right, let's look at question 7. So we're continue to read there, Jen. We're going through verses 17 to 22 now, and that's what's on the screen as well. 17 to 22. I'll ask the question first. This is a bit of a long one here. Before interpreting the writing, Daniel fearlessly reminded Belshazzar of Nebuchadnezzar's insanity because he failed to recognize and honor the God of heaven. Did Belshazzar already know this? Remember in our last study, we learnt that that Nebuchadnezzar went insane, and when he finally realized that, he came to his senses. Let's see if this Belshazzar, who is Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, knew about this. Let's go. 17 to 22. Thanks, Jen.
Then Daniel answered and said before the king, let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing to the king, and make known to him the interpretation. O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father a kingdom and majesty, glory and honour. And because of the majesty that he gave him, all peoples, nations and languages trembled and feared before him. Whomever he wished, he executed. Whomever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he set up. And whomever he wished, he put down. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. Then he was driven from the sons of men. His heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men, and appoints over it whomever he chooses. 22 then?
And 22, thanks.
But you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this.
All right, thank you for reading. So the question asks, did he know all this? Yes, he did. Although you knew all this. It's interesting what's going on. Last week we also looked at this concept of Belshazzar. What sort of king was he? He was young, probably in his mid-30s. We can tell by the time periods. He was a really arrogant man. He had no moral standards. Here he is having a drunken party, using the vessels that they'd taken from the temple of God. And his concubines and his lords are drinking out, and they're getting drunk, they're having this party. And he's got no moral compass at all, this man. He made it very, very clear in our first study of this. And I love the opening to this. I love what happens. Right here in the beginning of the dialogue with Belshazzar, Daniel shows his integrity. What's he say? He says, what's he say to him? Let your gifts be to yourself and give your rewards to another. You see that? He said, I don't do this for human reward. I don't follow God for human reward. I don't listen to his voice when he speaks to me for human reward. I don't do it for earthly treasure. And I love how he immediately puts this forward to him. Unlike what he spoke to Nebuchadnezzar like, if you recall. And we'll get that in a second anyway. We'll move on. So, also notice the tone of his voice. Let's go to Daniel chapter 4:19. Daniel 4:19. And see how Daniel addresses Nebuchadnezzar and how he's addressing Belshazzar here. Let's look at Daniel chapter 4:19 just quickly. Sedo, could you read that for us, please? 4:19.
Then Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, was astonished for a time, and his thoughts troubled him. So the king spoke and said, Belshazzar, do not let the dream of its interpretation trouble you. Belshazzar answered and said, My lord, may the dream concern those who hate you, and its interpretation concern your enemies.
You see this address here? What's he like towards Nebuchadnezzar? He's a captive, don't forget. He's there, but he's also the king's right-hand man. The king made him ruler over all his kingdom, remember? Because of his amazing wisdom and integrity. But how is he addressing Nebuchadnezzar here? He says, My lord, may the dream concern those who hate you, and its interpretation concern your enemies. I don't want this dream to be for you, Lord. You see, he's got this respect for Nebuchadnezzar. So over here, when he addresses Belshazzar, Belshazzar's called him in. He's offered to put this golden chain around his neck and make him the third ruler and put a purple garment on him and blah, blah, blah. The very next thing, Daniel answered and said, Let your gifts be to yourself and give your rewards to another. There's no, oh Lord, may you live forever. There's no
His contempt for
Belshazzar. Absolutely, he's contempt. The guy's an idiot. I mean, he's just as foolish king as we've seen all through the first section. He really doesn't have any concept of what his grandfather's gone through, and he knew it. He knew about Nebuchadnezzar going insane. He knew about Nebuchadnezzar giving his life to God in the end. He knew about all this stuff, and yet that was granddad. I'm the king now. Just the arrogance of this fellow. And Daniel's in his 80s now. This picture actually is a pretty good inscription. He's in his 80s, probably a little bit more, 84 or 5. So you can imagine the scene. There's this drunken party going on. The lords and the concubines are all there drinking, laughing, half drunk. And they call for Daniel to come. And in comes this noble elderly man, this white-haired man that they've been told can interpret this. And suddenly they start thinking about Nebuchadnezzar and this Daniel. Are you that Daniel? He says about him. And so here comes this stately person, walks into the room, and the place is hushed. The drunkenness ceases, the laughing ceases, and they're focusing on this statesman, this man as he walks in and looks at the writing on the wall. And his address is this: let your gifts be for yourself and give your rewards to another. I love that. It's so powerful. It's so typical Daniel. It's so typical Daniel. And then verse 22, further down. But you, his son Belshazzar, and of course it's his grandson, have not humbled your heart. So he's basically rebuking Belshazzar, although you knew all this. Although you knew all this. That's amazing. Look at Daniel 4, 34 to 37. Just to get a comparison of these two kings. It's not in your lesson. Let's go there on the Bible. Daniel 4, 34 to 37. Let's read here. This is the part, all of chapter 4 is about Nebuchadnezzar going insane. It's the dream of the tree that he had, and Daniel explains the tree dream to him, and that he goes insane. He was lifted up and puffed up with his pride, and we read that right through that whole chapter. But from 34 to 37 is the closing scenes of what's happening here. Let's read it and see the difference between these two kings. Neil, could you do that, please? Verse 34 to 37. Thank you.
And at the end of the time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and praised and honoured him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. He does according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. No one can restrain his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" At the same time, my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, my honour and splendour returned to me. My counsellors and nobles resorted to me. I was restored to my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honour the King of heaven, all of whose works are truth, and his ways justice. And those who walk in pride, he is able to put down.
What do we see here in this man, in this king?
Transformation.
A transformation. Absolutely. What did he do to realise in the very first, pretty much the very first sentence, as it is on the screen there as well? What did he have to do to realise that God's ultimately in control of earthly events and of his own life, or our own lives, if we surrender to him? What did he have to do?
Lifted his vision.
Lifted his eyes to heaven.
Yeah, looked high.
Nebuchadnezzar has gone through, we know in the first three chapters, this harsh king, this Babylonian heathen pagan king, finally, yes, Rosie.
I have a question. Verse 34,
Yep.
it says, "And my understanding returned to me."
Yes.
Does that imply that he was mentally incapable or incapacitated in some cognitive way during that period?
Yeah, he was insane. That's
So,
what the whole chapter 4 says.
yeah, but so how did the capacity return? It wouldn't have been on his own, of his own accord.
No.
So,
God. Yeah.
okay, I just wanted to make that clear.
The whole purpose of chapter 4, because that's what he wrote, tells us about his storyline and what happens to him. And God brought that back to him.
Exactly. So God brought it back.
Yeah.
It wasn't his own sort of
Yeah.
understanding.
No,
That
no. We
You have
questioned,
an
we looked at that at the very first lesson, and I think Jen mentioned something which was interesting as to, why did he go insane? Was it physically? Did God cause it? And Jen suggested that a lot of booze and alcohol can cause the brain to go a little bit, or was it the liver you were saying, or the kidneys?
Yeah.
Can mess things up and actually cause a mental, we don't know. A combination of, but I believe it was God's way of showing him and humbling this king, this arrogant king.
He went living the grand life for 12 months after it was shown to him.
Right?
12 months. He lived in his castle or whatever,
Yep.
just going about his merry way.
It always reminds me of the vegetarian diet I'm on. But I've been on it for 50 years, so I think it's all right.
Well, either way, the Bible tells us that he went insane, and at this point in time, at the end of that time, he lifted his eyes to heaven. So whether he was grovelling around on the ground, eating grass like it says so, and it's been a long time. It's been how many years? 7?
Yeah, it's a fair
It was
while.
7 years. And he finally looks up to heaven. God gives him finally his senses back to realise his situation. He would have been a mess. Imagine the hair for 7 years. And it says his fingernails were like bird claws, and his hair like feathers and so on. So 7 years untreated, it returned to him.
He would have been like walking with 2 feet, like a man.
He was on the ground, walking like an animal. The description is quite clear in chapter 4, verse there. But my point here is, Nebuchadnezzar went through all that. It took him to lift his eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me, and then he blessed the Most High, praised and honoured him who lives forever, and lists the things that God is, the very things that God wanted to teach him. He finally starts listing and says, I get it now. I get it now.
Interesting how he blessed the Most High. Potentially, he'd never done that before.
No,
And everything changed.
sure. Totally changed. And what happened to him? Verse 36, at the same time my reason returned to me, and for that the glory of my kingdom, my honour, my splendour returned to me. So he got his position back as being the great king that he was as well. Rachel?
Well, he had done it before, because dealing with Daniel, earlier in the book, he told everyone to praise the God of Daniel.
Yep.
So he was there at some point in time, but
Yep.
he lost his way.
Yeah, absolutely.
He lost his connection.
Well, you're talking about chapter 2, when
Yeah.
Daniel said the dream to him, what it exactly meant, and that's when he said that. But we see the very next chapter that he goes and builds a whole statue of gold and gets everyone to worship that. So he slid away and come back and slid away. But this was the change for him, this section right here. And he changed his life. He came, we.
Whatever the statecraft might be, Conrad, I was thinking he might have just felt, I led my people, the people, I'm supposed to be the king, and
Yep.
he's led them astray,
Yeah.
Put on a bad example.
Well, God returned that to him. All my splendour
Yeah.
returned to me. My nobles came back, my kingdom came back, my majesty came back. And verse 37, and I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honour the King of heaven. All of those works, all of his works are true, and his ways are justice, and those who walk in pride, he can put them down. He's talking about himself. I get it now. He's a converted man. And so the reason I did that, it's not in the lesson, but the reason I did that was because look at the difference. You've got Belshazzar using the anointed vessels that they took from the temple to have a party with and drink. And we're going to see that was the main point that God condemned Babylon this night. And we're going to go on and see that now, which is really interesting. Belshazzar, on the other hand, Belshazzar, on the other hand, has been numbered. He's been weighed in the balances, and he's been found wanting. His destruction of Babylon is about to happen. Do we know and recognise God in our lives? Or are we kind of doing a bit of a slide as well? Just think about that. Because these stories, and I've said this before, whenever you study the Bible, always apply them to self. Always apply them to yourself. What can I take home from this message of Nebuchadnezzar coming back from his madness and extolling God and worshipping him? What can I take from that? Jeff?
It's in our nature to do a shuffle.
Sadly, isn't it?
Yes.
It is. As was his.
Yes.
But good for him, he realised before it was too late. Yeah? Stephanie?
He was a little bit up and down because in chapter 3, verse 28, it mentions where he says, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." And then he made a decree in the next verse.
Just like he did in chapter 2 of Daniel. I mean, those 3 men didn't burn in that furnace, which is an amazing miracle. And that's why he said that. And here he is himself coming out of insanity and praising God as well. So he did see and he slept. Chapter 2, he saw and slept. Chapter 3, he saw and slept. Chapter 4, he's still being arrogant and proud until this happened, and then he saw and he stayed seeing. That's a great message. He saw his point, he saw his error, but he had to lift his eyes to heaven to do it. He had to realise it and acknowledge and see, which is really powerful, that little section in there. That's why I wanted to point it out.
I was thinking from my reading during the week that Constantine in the 300s, he had a bit of a similar path in his later years. He put up a statue of himself, whatever.
Yeah.
State business.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of them did it. A lot of them were, fist shaking at God.
But
I'm going to do it my way.
But then the word in their mouth was Christianity at the time.
Well, yeah.
Sun worship.
Do we know and do we recognise God? What's the Bible say? The Bible here in Jeremiah says, "For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, says the Lord." What a beautiful line. Thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and go and pray to me, and I will listen to you, says God. And you will seek me and find me when you what? Search for me with all your heart. Never have to look up. We need to look up. When we're sliding, doing whatever in life, God is in control. We've seen this in this lesson tremendously, and this is a nice little verse. King Neb found this and changed his ways. It's really good. All right, let's keep going. So Belshazzar knew all this stuff, and yet he still was this arrogant young man. Daniel makes it very clear, this is the note for question 7, very clear that Belshazzar already knew the reason for Nebuchadnezzar's insanity and evidently was well acquainted with the true God. But in spite of this, he had failed to humble himself and follow the footsteps of his grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar. All right, let's go to question 8. Verse 23. Is that you, Paris? 5:23. Thanks, Paris.
That has lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven, and thou hast brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords, and thy wives, and thy concubines, and drunk wine in them. And thou hast praised the gods of silver, and of gold, of brass, iron, wood, and stone, which see not, nor hear, nor know, and the God whose hand thy breath is, and whose all thy ways hast thou not glorified.
All right. This verse here is extremely key for us to continue these studies and for what's going on in the world today. This is why Belshazzar and Babylon were condemned. Yes, there was arrogance involved, but they've stepped and gone past. They've stepped across the line. Belshazzar has stepped across the line. Just to fill out your pamphlets there if you haven't already, you've lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You brought the vessels of his house and drunk wine in them. Why was this such a big deal? Well, the note says in the lesson, it is this defiling act of taking the vessels that were consecrated to the worship of the true God and mixing them with pagan worship that brought the wrath of God upon Belshazzar. So, what does that tell us?
There's
Paris?
a powerful argument here against ecumenism.
Yeah.
God doesn't actually like religions being blended with
There you go.
his worship.
I just asked that question. What is this? What could this mean? Thank you, Paris. That's a good statement. Does God like the mixture of multiple religions? Because multiple religions don't do what God says. So here we have these guys taking these holy consecrated vessels that were used in the temple and pouring booze in them and partying up as a bunch of pagans that they were, and that's fine for them, that's what they were. But to do this is defilement, it's sacrilege. He had no moral compass at all, this Belshazzar fellow. If you remember we spoke about Nebuchadnezzar. Yes, he took those vessels, but where did he put them? He put them in his God's temple, in the treasury of the temple. So they were locked away. Because Neb recognized that these vessels are somehow holy. They're somehow used for holy use. I'm not going to mess with them. He'd heard about the God of heaven. He'd heard about the Hebrew God. He knew him quite well. Matter of fact, in Jeremiah, I don't have it with me right now, he offers Jeremiah to come to Babylon and live with him in peace before he comes and raids Jerusalem. That's in there. So he knew about the God of heaven, and he took these vessels and he respectfully put them away. And here's his grandson drinking booze out of them and partying. This is why it is this defiling act that God's going to punish Babylon Belshazzar. What does that say to us about today? Doesn't say anything for us today. What's the take-home message for this? Remember? Everything's the take-home message. What's the take-home message here, you think? Is there one for us? Jeff?
There has to be wrath
There has to be wrath?
to come.
I was thinking when I was a younger fellow in Australia growing up, a big night out was to the fish and chip shop, perhaps.
Yeah.
And nowadays it's to the Thai restaurant, to the, Cambodian feast palace and all these other things. And I don't really go there that much, but I haven't always got a happy relationship. And I believe that was what a lot of the folks in that area did. If they had some sort of an actual conflict, they would take the precious things and use them as they saw fit.
How does God view that?
Not too happy about that.
So what does it tell us? What can that tell us? When we saw that video last week about this gender business with kids and so on, what does that tell us? Do we need to be careful about? Is this trying to tell us something to be careful here?
There's no difference in the defiling
No.
today
No.
to that.
No, there isn't.
Probably was.
It's just a different defilement, but there's no difference in defiling.
No.
Yeah. Rosie?
I'd like to say that it also goes to show that we need to treat our places of worship, not just the articles within there,
Yeah.
but we need to keep them holy.
Yeah.
And, the modern churches these days, tend to have it less holy, there's this impression that they're less holy than the cathedrals, because when you walk into a cathedral there's this stony silence and etc. And our modern day churches seem to be bustling with discussion. But the take home for me is that our place of worship is where God is. We need to watch what we say, what's in our hearts. We've got to watch what we say, treat it with respect and holiness, and the articles within it are to be treated. So the articles that we use for the Lord's Supper and whatever, they should also be treated with respect and holiness.
I mean, if a pagan king knew it, you know what I mean? So, okay, thanks, Rosie. That's a really good personal response. What about a corporate response? What about you mentioned churches and different churches doing things differently, perhaps different to the way God wants them done.
Maybe could be maybe putting unholy music. Maybe could be
Unholy music in the church, yeah, rock bands or whatever else like that. Idolatry in the church, yeah.
A general reverence about, when you enter, being silent.
Yeah.
Things like that.
It's just general respect, isn't it?
Yeah, just general respect.
So the point is, and why I say this is so important for our future studies coming up, especially chapter 7, which we'll be doing pretty soon. We've got chapter 6 first. We need to understand that God takes his law and God takes his standard very seriously. That's the point. As we see here, he takes it extremely seriously. So if there's any defiling act, and that could deem many different things, God takes it very, very seriously. And we're going to see that as we go on with our study, what that means, without letting the cat out of the bag too much now. It's an important point, and I wanted to stop there and stress it. Yes, Ashley.
Just to add, I think that God has a very high standard for people who know, like with the Israelites in the Old Testament, like they knew what was right, and God specifically told them what was right.
Yep.
So their defilement was like really disappointing to
Yep.
him. And when you compare it, like
Good point.
I was just reading about like the Philistines when they had the ark.
Right, yes.
When they sent it back, they sent it on a cart. They didn't touch it, like they just let it go, because that's what they knew. They knew that it was like a holy thing, but it's like not to be messed with.
Yeah.
And then you compare it to Uzzah in the Old Testament when he touched the ark,
Yes.
but like he knew that
Yes.
was wrong.
Yeah.
So God's very strict, but he's especially strict with those who know better. Like they have the information to know what's right.
Yep. And that's the point of this story here, right? Nebuchadnezzar knew it, and he locked those vessels away in the treasury. Belshazzar knew it, and he called him out to drink booze out of. See the difference? Defiling what is sacred.
So maybe I was reading during the week, maybe right and wrong are not absolute. I think this is the idea I took, studying something that what enacts upon right and wrong is the character of the person involved and the circumstances, which I thought was pretty interesting in, contemplating this 2,500 years ago.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, huh?
We saw his pagan king convert. We see his grandson, who also knew of the conversion and of everything else, and of Daniel. I know you, he said. I know your real story. You don't do anything that we do, but you've got an amazing spirit with God. You've got a connection with him. He knew all that, and yet he's still. So it comes down to person.
I was thinking, like peer pressure is the term we use today.
Yeah.
All the different countries behave like each other, and all got morals now.
Yeah. You think that stands with God, peer pressure?
I don't. I think I've got the absolute's a big word. That's all.
Yeah. I don't think God accepts peer pressure as an excuse, to be quite honest. We're individuals, and if we got to walk with God, then who's over here, tempting, pushing, whatever, me, shouldn't matter. That's my walk with God. You got yours, I got mine. I follow some boundaries that he gives me. You can follow whatever boundaries you wish, but I'm going this way. Rachel?
I think that it is important who we do spend our time with, because I'm pretty sure it says in the Bible, I'm not good with verse names and stuff, but that we are influenced by those that we hang around with. So we do need to be discerning of the people that we spend time with. Like we see with the paralytic guy who went to visit Jesus by his friends. His friends took him to Jesus and lowered him down through the roof. He was basically saved from his paralytic state because of his friends. So it can go both ways. It can be to your benefit, but it can also be to your detriment.
Thanks, Rachel. So what trust did Belshazzar have in life? What was his trust? What was his faith? What was his God? Himself? His strength? Yeah. Ego? That's a huge one today. Heaps of people trust in their ego. There's amazing stuff been written about this chapter, and here's one here. This book here, written by Henry Feyerabend, it's called Daniel Verse by Verse, page 78, and it says, "Why should Belshazzar worry? The walls of Babylon are impregnable and invincible. They were 350 feet high and 87 feet wide. So wide that 6 chariots could race on top of them, side by side. Imagine 6 chariots side by side having races around the wall of on the road. So these things were massive. They were impregnable. You couldn't get through. This is, of course, is history. There was 100 gates of burnished bronze protected the city. The storehouses of Babylon were bulging with supplies. I read they had 20 years of food supply stored. Now, what used to happen in those days with wars, you didn't just go in guns a-blazing or drop bombs from the sky, clearly. What would happen is you'd do a siege around a town if you wanted to take it, or a kingdom or a palace. You would siege. You'd send all your men, you'd surround the whole place, and you'd sit 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, till they starved themselves to death or ran out of water or whatever it was. Then you attacked. Then they'd surrender, which was the normal case. These guys had 20 years of food supply. They weren't going to surrender. The Euphrates River flowed through the city. They had an abundance of water. They were going nowhere. There's no way an army would wait 20 years before they sieged these guys. They wouldn't bother. It was impregnable. An enemy would have to give up a blockade long before the city surrendered. Babylon was as secure as the unsinkable Titanic. Bit of tongue-in-cheek there from the author, I think, because we all know what happened to the Titanic. Belshazzar placed his trust in his city, in his walls, and in his armies. But he didn't place his trust in God. That would prove to be his fatal mistake. Yeah? I found that really interesting. I like that one. Psalms tells us in chapter 20, verse 6 to 8, just on the screen for the sake of time, Now know I that the Lord saved his anointed. He will hear him from his holy heaven with the saving strength of his right hand. Some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. We are brought down and fallen, but we are risen and stand upright. This is David speaking a psalm when he's always been battled and struggling, how he places his faith and trust in God, which is really, really important for us to understand. In other words, Belshazzar was found lacking. Verse 27, as we read back here, getting back to our story, verse 27. Where is it? We'll get there in a second. Verse 27 says, in other words, Belshazzar was found lacking with moral worth. The kingdom was to be broken in pieces. Let's go there now and look at that. Question 9. Question 9. We're going to be reading verses 24 to 28. Who's next to read? I've forgotten. Stephanie. Thanks, Stephanie.
Then was the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the writing that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Peres, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians.
All right, so here's this writing on the wall. It's these 4 words. One's repeated twice, and they don't know what it means. And Daniel explains it to them. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. This is the interpretation, each word, as we just read there. Notice verse 27. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. In other words, Belshazzar was found lacking in moral worth. Yeah, very, very clear. Verse 28 again says, Peres, your kingdom has been divided. The kingdom was to be broken in pieces, destroyed, dissolved. It wasn't just going to be 2 amounts because the Medes and the Persians, they get half each. No. It was dissolved. It was shattered into pieces. And that's where this business about mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. Here's a chart that I found, which I found really interesting. This writing, of course, that this is written in, and the days of the Babylonians was Amharic language. And there's the writing that was on the wall. The words themselves were nouns. Mena or mina was actually a quantity or an amount of gold. The verb for the word is mena, and it means to number. Tekel is an Aramaic spelling of, it's actually shekel, which is actually a currency as well. That word comes from shekel, and it means to weigh. Now the upharsin, because it says here Peres, and you kind of got to ask the question, well, hang on, it says mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. Where'd the Peres come from? Yeah, verse 28. Yeah, it's a good question. Well, here's where it comes from. This is the word, this is the plural word for Upharsin. Okay, so it's got up here. Upharsin, or the U, is the plural word for Perez. Ignore that. Perez means to share or portion. That's why it means to break apart, as it says here. The plural form then means in pieces. So we get such clarity here that it's not just Upharsin, it's not just Perez where it's broken into a piece, it's broken into multiple pieces, which gives you much more clarity. The word Perez also contains the consonants for the name Persia. So it has two meanings, Perez. It's the plural. Upharsin is the plural of the word Perez. Okay? I didn't teach this language. I don't teach it. That's how it is. Aramaic is such. So that's why we have, you've been numbered, you've been weighed, you're going to break up. See that? That's why it's Perez. It's actually, Perez is Upharsin is the plural word for Perez. That's multiple. You're going to be broken up in multiple ways. Which is, it's good to know because people ask simple questions like that. It doesn't make any sense, but that's how it all is. The head of gold. Who's the head of gold in the Daniel statue? Babylon. The head of gold was about to pass to the chest and arms of silver. Remember that? Back in our chapter 2 days? The great kingdom of Babylon was about to fall to the Medes and the Persians. All right, let's keep going. Question 10. The note there, of course, at question 9. God was announcing the fall of Babylon. That very night, October 12, 539 BC, Babylon fell. And we're going to look at that a little bit later on. Let's go to question 10 now. What have we got? Verse 30 and 31. Who's next to read? Is that you, Rosie? Thank you.
Verse 30 says, "That very night Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old."
Okay. There you have it. That's the end of Babylon. Right there. The judgment was given to them. Men, Tekel, Upharsin. And that very night Belshazzar and the Chaldeans was slain, and Darius and the Mede took it over. How soon did the prophecy be fulfilled? It came that very night. Darius and the Mede. That's right. They felt secure. They felt secure. Belshazzar felt secure in his kingdom. The note says, even while the feast was going on, the fall of Babylon had begun. The Babylonians had felt safe in their city. The river Euphrates, which ran through the city, provided a constant source of water. The walls were impregnable. We saw that earlier. There was plenty of food stored for a long siege. The Babylonians knew that the army of the Medes and Persians were on the outside. They knew they were there. Think of the arrogance of that. No one can get in here. Who cares if they're outside? No one's going to get us. They knew they were outside. But they felt secure. They felt secure. However, Cyrus, the commander of the Medes and Persians, performed an ingenious engineering feat. He had the soldiers divert the river Euphrates. Unreal. Then he marched his army through the riverbed underneath the wall of the city. Remember, the river ran through, under the walls?
Wouldn't they have noticed an empty riverbed?
It's night time. It's night time. They're partying. They're feasting. The nobles are inside drunk as skunks, as are the guards outside. They're looking at the Medes and the Persians from their towers, thinking, "You got no chance. We're impregnable." They had gates going underwater through the Euphrates as well, just in case they swam underneath the gate. Underneath the wall, you couldn't get in. There's a shut gate. Those gates were left open because of the drunken soldiers that night.
Plus, I don't think it's something that they would actually expect to happen. The riverbed to be...
Of course not. To actually go away. And they weren't actually keeping an eye on it. They didn't divert all of it, by the way. And we'll get there in a second. Then he marched his army through the riverbed beneath the wall of the city and through the inside gates which had been left open by the drunken Babylonians. Thus mighty Babylon fell. Where do they place their faith? They place their faith in their own stronghold. Are we safe in placing our faith on human strength and human traditions as well? No, it's a scary one to do. Colossians 2:8 says, "Beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Christ." Remember I said this is an important one because it's pointing to things, defilement of things, that we're going to see a lot more of in our future studies. This is telling us, beware that no one deceives you with their philosophy and their empty deceit. Because religion today is philosophical. There's always some guru, some shaman who's out there teaching you and telling you how things need to be, how the energies of the earth is like this, and you need to do this to follow. There's always some sort of philosophy out there. All religion has philosophy. And yet the Bible's telling us here, beware you're not cheated, according to traditions of men and according to the basic principles of the world. There's two huge factors right there. All our schooling is based on that for starters.
I'd rather you put interpret the Bible your own way.
Yeah.
Another way, of course.
So there's some serious situations for us to be living through with this, and not according to Christ. Just be careful, it's telling us here. Be warned. Satan has done and is doing everything he can to deceive the entire world against God. He's even deceived Christians by setting up false or apostate Christian church systems. And we're going to see a lot more of that soon. For the most part, it's not these Christian folk who are wrong, but it's the church system that's steering them wrong. Remember that. It's really important to understand that. Steve, you want to say that?
Oh, just an observation, really, that he's Belshazzar in amongst all the security of the township,
the palace,
of Babylon, right? And that because he's defiled the gold cup and the
vessels, yes,
the
used,
vessels, right?
yep.
He defiled. Now, all this was taken quite a period of time to put in place. The diverting of the Euphrates and
sure,
etc.
Sure.
That plan that was going on in the background just happened to reach its crescendo of Darius
that
taking
night.
over that night.
Yeah, that night.
Those two meeting that night is quite incredible, really.
Divine, perhaps?
The life of Belshazzar, up until then, he said he's in his early 30s, so I don't know, that whole diverting the Euphrates, etc., and the takeover of for the Medes and Persians.
Yeah.
And as soon as he's touched or defiled the vessels of God, that night, it's the fall of Babylon. It's
that party was a straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. Yeah, Rachel.
I think that kind of thing just shows the all-knowingness of God.
Yeah.
I mean, I have heard so many stories of people praying about something, and all the things that went in place to answering that prayer were put in place way before the prayer, and they're happening pretty much moments after the prayer has taken place.
Yeah.
So when things are in God's time, it is divine. But I think that it just speaks to that.
Remember that verse we read before? I know the things I've planned for you, good things to make you happy and strong and healthy, all sorts of things. He knows. Like Rachel just said, before we pray, he knows. And if we choose that path, then the event happens in that timing. If we don't choose that path, the event's not going to happen in that timing.
Yeah, and the difference in between the sorcerers and the Chaldeans and everything else that was called on to both Belshazzar and Nebuchadnezzar, they'd called on them and their uncertainties, and they couldn't work it out. But the God of Daniel here shows in just that one night the enormity his care for us and the planning that goes into, well, not the planning, but the
Logistics.
he knows how to make a statement anyway. God.
He sure does. Well, is this story just a load of fiction, or did it really happen? No, let's see. New World Encyclopedia, Babylonia. On October 12, Gubaru's troops entered the capital, Babylon, again without any resistance from the Babylonian armies. Herodotus, which is a Greek historian who kept things in check with his writings, explains that to accomplish this feat, the Persians diverted the Euphrates River into a canal so that the water level dropped to the height of the middle of a man's thigh, Rosie. It wasn't empty, but it was, which allowed the invading forces to march directly to the riverbed enter at night. The world knows about it. It's history. It really happened. Well, the prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah are especially noteworthy because they recorded 200 years in advance. Jeremiah and Isaiah, the books just before Daniel, 200 years in advance this was going to happen. This is about 150 years before Cyrus was even born. Jeremiah is given a vision by God that this guy named Cyrus is going to turn up and he's going to take over Babylon.
Cyrus and Darius, were they the Medes and the Persians?
Yes, yes, the two kings, the Medes and the Persians. And it says, consider the following, a man named Cyrus would conquer Babylon and free the Jews. Here it is in Scripture. Jeremiah, make the arrows bright, gather the shields. The Lord has raised up the spirit of the kings of the Medes. For his plan is against Babylon to destroy it, because it is the vengeance of the Lord, the vengeance of his temple. This is 200 years before it happened. Oh, that's amazing. Isaiah says, who says to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up your rivers. 200 years before it happened. Wow. The detail, Steve, the detail of that event and that timing, God's in control. Isaiah said, here you go.
In the overall scheme of things, it's that God that's wanting to have a relationship with us.
Absolutely.
That's the miracle.
Isaiah says, who says of Cyrus, he names the guy. He doesn't just say a king of Persia is going to come. He is my shepherd, says God, and he shall perform my pleasure, saying to Jerusalem, you shall be built, and to the temple your foundations shall be laid. And we all know when Cyrus got in that he allowed them to go back and rebuild the Jerusalem temple. God named him 150 years before he was born. I find that astounding. Isaiah again, thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held, to subdue nations before him and loose the armour of kings. What happened to Belshazzar when he saw the writing on the wall? Remember? His knees shook together and his bowels were loosed. Loose the armour of the kings. I love the tongue-in-cheek here. To open before him the double doors so that the gates would not be shut. The detail is incredible. And yet history tells us that's exactly what happened. Foretold 200 years before in these two books, Jeremiah. Wow. The Bible predicted it. History predicted. Bible critics always say the Bible is inaccurate. It's been totally flawed and made defective. Yet true history, science and archaeology all credit the Bible for its accuracy. It cannot be done. Is this just another story? Is this just another story in the Bible, the book of Daniel? Or do people know this stuff? Do people know this out there? Do people know about the debauchery and the goings on of these ancient Babylonians? You think? We saw that history knows about it. But what do people in general know about this stuff?
It only took 2 generations, didn't it, between Belshazzar and Nebuchadnezzar. He knew about it, but he didn't learn from it.
Not at all.
So we're quite a few generations removed from it.
We are quite a few.
Yeah, but we still know about it.
Yeah.
But it's got to change us.
Remember a little while ago we saw an interview with this guy, Boyzone's Shane Lynch, we showed a video about him. He talked about the music industry and how it's satanic. Remember that one? That was a few lessons ago. You were here, Jen, for that one? He talked about what it's like and how CD masters are prayed over satanically in a special room, and it goes out to the people. Incredible interview. I suggest you watch it. So these guys, he knew, he pointed out to us that they knew about this satanic side of things, and our music is used incredibly so. Who's heard of the band Iron Maiden? Old rocker band. Have a look at their brochures for some of their concerts. Iron Maiden. What's in the background? The Tower of Babel. What's he standing on? The Ishtar Gate of Babylon. And what's the bottom line say? The fires of Belshazzar. Do these guys know this stuff or not?
I actually met Ian Dickinson when I was 19.
Did you?
Yeah, he's lovely.
Is he?
He's
Okay.
so lovely.
All right.
And he gives a really good foot massage.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
How old was he then?
He
Was he obviously rocking away on this thing?
he wasn't old. I mean, I was 19, so it was a long time
It
ago.
was a long time ago, Jen.
It was a very
You and I
long
share a
time
birthday, so I know what you're talking about.
But no, he was really lovely. His sister was show jumping. Yeah, but some of his crew were a little scary.
Look at this other concert he did. Belshazzar's Feast. Iron Maiden. Live Forever. Man or Beast. Heaven or Hell. I don't know. I didn't do this. That's their concerts.
They know about it.
They know about it. They sure do know about it.
At least the promoters know about it.
Yeah.
Sorry?
At least the promoters know
Yeah.
about it.
Well, yeah, that's right. At least the promoters know about it. And of course, Shane Lynch told us a whole lot of stuff, didn't he? About all sorts of bands, boy groups, girl groups, singles. He gave it to us pretty tight. All right. There's a note here about the Euphrates River. Have we done that one yet? Have we done 16? No, we haven't. Okay, let's go there. Euphrates. The note says, the same conditions that existed at the fall of ancient Babylon will exist again at the end time. The drying up of the ancient river Euphrates prepared the way for Cyrus and his armies who came from the east. Having conquered Babylon, Cyrus eventually allowed God's people to go back to Palestine from their captivity. Thus, he is seen as the deliverer of God's people. Once more, in the book of Revelation, the river Euphrates is dried up, which supports spiritual Babylon is dried up to prepare the way for the kings of the east, the mighty deliverer of God's people. We're going to do a lot more of this later on. So we're seeing there's parallels going on here. The river Euphrates dried up then, and it's going to dry up again in our days.
It's well and truly on the way.
It's well and truly on the way.
Yeah.
It is. It is.
It's not literal. People think, oh, it's literal.
Yes, good point, son. It's not literally going to dry up, but the river Euphrates stands for something. And we're going to see that in our studies. It's very, very clear in the Bible what that means. I know there was a lot of hype. When was it? Last year, the Euphrates water levels dropped. It was drying up. So a lot of people freaking out. Oh, the kings from the east, they're going to walk across the riverbed. Here it is. It's happening. Bible prophecy. Well, yeah, but not really. We're going to find out what this means. This river Euphrates drying up. Let's go to Revelation. Next in our lesson. Question. We still got a bit more time. Question 11. Let's go to Revelation. We finished Daniel chapter 5. We're done. It's all over for poor Babylon. They're gone. It's happened. The next kingdom is the Medes and Persians, that big silver chest of arms on that statue of Daniel 2. Let's go to Revelation and look at some comparisons. Revelation 16, verses 12 to 16. Revelation 16, 12 to 16. We got about 15 minutes left. Revelation 16, 12 to 16. Who's next to read? Is that you, Zoran? Thanks, Zoran. 16, 12 to 16.
12 to 16. Okay.
What's it say?
Let's have a look. Euphrates King. Then the sixth angel poured out his bowl
on the great river Euphrates, and its waters was dried up so that the way of the kings from the east might be prepared. And I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophets. For they are the spirits of demons, and performing signs which go out to the kings of the earth and of the whole world, to gather them to the battle of the great day of God Almighty. We're up to?
We're going to 16.
16. Behold, I am coming as a thief. Blessed is he who watches and keeps his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. And they gathered them together to the place called in Hebrew Armageddon.
All right. Here's the Revelation account. This is the end days, the last days. The word Armageddon always raises eyebrows, I think, with anybody on the planet. This is what we're talking about. What does it start with? What does verse 12 start with? Then the 6th angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up. This is part of the last day plagues that Revelation talks about. And this is plague number 6. We're going to do this in depth in our studies a bit further on, so hang on for that. We're going to understand what this unclean spirits are, this dragon, the beast, the false prophet. We're going to get all this stuff out very, very clear in our studies to come. So keep coming, keep watching. So we're seeing this concept again of this river Euphrates being dried up. What does that mean? We'll find out. So we're just trying to get parallels here that for the physical Babylon it happened, and for spiritual Babylon, which we've discussed here in our previous lessons, is going to happen then as well. So what does it mean? We'll get to that. All right. So river Euphrates dried up. It prepared the way for the kings from the east. All right. Let's go to question 12. We're going to read Revelation 16 again, but this time we're reading verse 18 and 19. So basically just continuing on from where we stopped. Thanks, Ashley.
18 and 19.
17 to 19 we're going to do.
Then the 7th angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, "It is done." And there were noises and thunderings and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such a mighty and great earthquake as had not occurred since men were on the earth. Now the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon was remembered before God, to give her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath.
That's a pretty heavy piece of reading. What happens when the kings of the east come to deliver God's people in Revelation? Great Babylon was remembered before God. Seeing some parallels here. What happened with Belshazzar? Cyrus came from the east. River Euphrates was dried up and they were taken down. This is now Revelation. This is our times. It says the Euphrates is going to dry up. Kings from the east are going to come and take out Babylon, the great Babylon. Who's the great Babylon? What's the great Babylon? We're going to find all that out. I'm just looking at parallels now. This study is pivotal for us to continue because we're lining up what happened with physical Babylon then, and we're going to look at what spiritual Babylon today is like. And they're very, very... The storylines are the same. The characters change. The people of the time change. It's us now, not them. But the storyline is very same, and its meaning is the same. Great Babylon was remembered before God. The same events that caused the fall of ancient Babylon will cause the fall of Babylon at the time of the end. That's us now. All right. Revelation makes it very clear that there will be another Babylon at the time of the end. The Babylon spoken of in Revelation is not the same as the Babylon of Daniel's day, obviously, When Cyrus and Darius conquered Babylon, it became a heap of ruins and has remained so to this present day. The Bible foretells the rise of another Babylon, which will do the same to God's people as did ancient Babylon. Modern Babylon, according to the Bible Revelation, is the final great oppressor of the people of God. Okay? That's the note. Let's go to Revelation 17, question 13. Revelation 17, 1 and 2. Revelation 17, 1 and 2. Who's next to read? Steve? Thanks, Steve.
Okay.
What does the Bible call Babylon? This is interesting.
Verse 1. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute, who sits by many waters. With her the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries."
So, the question asks, what does the Bible call Babylon? The great harlot or prostitute who sits on many waters. In the beginning of our studies several weeks ago, months ago now, what does waters mean prophetically with those charts? Peoples, nations and groups. Okay. She's sitting on lots of people, nations and groups, and she's a harlot. What's a harlot? A prostitute. Why? Without going into physical detail, what's a prostitute? What is a prostitute?
You have relations with you for money.
Okay, she has illicit relationships with others for money. Yeah, that's basic explanation. Okay, that's interesting. Park that. We're going to get back to that. It means a great deal with what's coming up with our studies. I'm almost exploding out of my skin here, but I can't tell you. We'll get to there. It's going to be really important. Question 40. Let's keep going here. Verse 15 of chapter 17. Rachel, is that you?
Yeah.
Verse 15. What does that say?
Verse 15 of
Revelation 17.
Okay. Then he said to me, "The waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues."
There you go. The Bible even tells us what it is. Fill in your gaps there. So, what do the waters of the harlot represent? The waters represent all the people over which Babylon has control. This is no longer Daniel's Babylon, okay? This is our end-time Babylon. This is Revelation now we're in. The waters represent all the people over which Babylon has control. So there are people who are being controlled by modern-day Babylon. Babylon is called the harlot because of her illicit relationships. I wonder what's the relationship she's got. We'll find out. We'll find out. Let's keep going. 17 verse 2. Question 15. 17 verse 2. We're back to Tesla. You're not paying attention? You're not in Revelation, are you?
No,
you are.
yeah.
17:2. Son, can you read that for us, please? What does that say?
Yeah. Then whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication.
All right, fill in your gaps. What is the great sin of Babylon? What's the great sin of Babylon? The earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. There are books, and there are practices, and there are all sorts of things going on today that are against God. Plain and simple, against the Bible. I know we've mentioned religions before, and we're not putting religions down. There are folk, we're looking at the world through the lens of this, remember? And we're just seeing what this has to say and what's out there. We're not condemning anyone. But this fact is a fact that it's going on. And we've seen previously, we've seen why the Babylon of Belshazzar's day went down. Why? Remember why? Why did God bring his wrath upon them? The defiling act of God's vessels. Yeah? Remember that. It's really important that the world is defiling God's way. It's important. Rachel?
I think when it comes to this fornication, I mean, God wants to have a relationship with us, and like a marriage between a husband and wife is often what our relationship with Christ and God is supposed to be like. So if we're going off with other idols, other gods, those kinds of things, then we're in the mode of fornication towards Him.
Yep, absolutely.
Over recent years, I used to do a lot of nature time. I used to do sand mining along the coast, and it finished in cow slaughtering and Byron Bay, and it finished. Did a bit of surfing, and I was hoping that it wasn't World Surf League where they advertise beer, give a gold cup at the end, and everybody's just sitting there thinking, oh, I hope they don't get eaten like a Colosseum by a jelly bugger or something.
Okay. Yeah. Let's finish with this note because the meeting is happening after this. Spiritual adultery. Remember the harlot word and what she is? Babylon's great sin is fornication or adultery. Adultery is an illicit relationship. Obviously, in this case, it's not a physical adultery, but it's a spiritual adultery. Note that, very important. Spiritual adultery is an illicit relationship that combines the worship of God with false worship. What's it do? It combines the worship of God with false worship, like Belshazzar was doing. In Daniel 5, we saw the ancient Babylon acted defiantly against God with an illicit relationship, mixing elements of worship of God with those of pagan deities. Spiritual Babylon's fornication or adultery, spiritual Babylon, that's today, likewise is an illicit relationship that mixes elements of the worship of God with pagan practice. There's nothing that brings down the wrath of God more than an illicit relationship of truth and error. Babylon purports to worship God, in other words, it says it does, spiritual Babylon, but has mixed truth with error, paganism with Christianity. This can only invite the wrath of God. We're going to close there. That gives us a couple of minutes to pack up and for our meeting. Any questions? It's all pretty heavy stuff.
Is this sort of related to like the Laodicean church, which is lukewarm? It's like mixing cold and hot, so it's like sort of a mix.
Yes.
You'd rather have either hot or rather cold?
In a way, yes. Yes. We're lax. I mean, a lot of Christian churches and people read these books and these practices. 90%. There you go. So yes, there's a mix. There's a mix going on, and this was the rocking horse line. Daniel 5 actual, Revelation spiritual. See that? And the defiling act is what brings down the wrath of God. Let's close in prayer so we can pack up. Dear Lord, thank you so much for your blessings and your guidance. Thank you for studying this word, this message today. As we continue to go on, we ask for your wisdom so we have understanding what we're reading. So we can take this stuff and put it in our hearts because it's very real. We've seen it in the world. We're seeing it a lot more. We're seeing it at our schools. We're seeing it in music. We're seeing it in the movies. We're seeing it in our magazines. We're seeing it online. It's everywhere. Help us and guide us to go through these challenging walks and to try and do it